Imagine stepping out onto a quiet suburban street just as the evening is beginning to settle in. The sun is slowly lowering toward the horizon, and its warm golden light stretches across rows of carefully maintained houses. Long shadows fall across the sidewalks, and the air carries the calm, familiar feeling of a peaceful neighborhood at the end of an ordinary day. Everything appears normal. Children are finishing their games outside, riding bicycles or tossing a ball back and forth. In the street, parents are calling them in for dinner. A dog barks somewhere in the distance, and the sound echoes softly through the quiet neighborhood. Nothing feels unusual. Nothing feels dangerous in places like this. People often feel a deep sense of comfort. Neighbors recognize each other's faces. People wave as they pass by. The routines of everyday life repeat themselves day after day in a way that makes the world feel predictable and secure. But sometimes, the most ordinary places can hide the most unexpected dangers. Sometimes a single moment can quietly change everything. For one young girl, that moment would arrive on a night that seemed just like any other. Her name was Elizabeth. Smart. Before the events that would eventually make headlines across the entire country, Elizabeth lived a life that many would describe as happy and peaceful. She grew up surrounded by family, friends, and the comfort of a stable home environment. Her family was close-knit. The house was often filled with conversation, laughter, and the small, everyday moments that define a normal childhood. Meals were shared together. Conversations happened around the dinner table. School, family activities, and community life created a rhythm that felt steady and dependable. The neighborhood itself reflected that same sense of security. It was the kind of community where children felt comfortable walking outside and where neighbors often trusted one another. For many families, it felt like the kind of place where serious crimes simply did not happen. People believed they were safe. And for a long time, they were. But safety can sometimes be more fragile than people realize.
From the morning we found out she had been abducted, then her rescue 9 months later, to today covering her advocacy work. In this new Netflix film, Smart relives that June night in 2002 when Brian David Mitchell kidnapped her from her Arlington Hills home. There was a massive response hours later. KSL archive video shows police vehicles, helicopters, and people searching the foothills desperately for 14-year-old Smart. She was spotted on State Street in Sandy and rescued by police 9 months later. She endured a lot of abuse. And in an interview with NBC This Morning, Smart says one of her children started asking her about her abduction when they were just 3 years old. She says she's been having conversations with them about it ever since, and those talks have expanded as her children grow up. The documentary features interviews with Smart, her dad, Ed, her sister, Mary Catherine, as well as local law enforcement and journalists. Smart says it was important to share her experience to help other survivors.
I felt like I needed to have a purpose to sharing my story, and I remember how alone I felt when I first came home because nobody talked about kidnapping or abuse or rape. And so since the trial, I've just felt like that's something that I need to talk about so other victims don't feel alone either.
On the evening before Elizabeth disappeared, nothing about the day stood out as unusual. It had been a completely typical day, filled with ordinary routines and small everyday activities. She spent time with her family. She moved through the normal rhythm of the evening. The house slowly grew quieter as night approached, just as it had so many times before. Eventually, everyone prepared to go to sleep. The lights were turned off. The doors were closed. The quiet calm of the night settled over the house and the surrounding neighborhood. But while the family slept peacefully inside their home, someone else was nearby. Someone who had been watching. Investigators would later determine that the man responsible for the crime had spent time observing the area. His name was Brian David Mitchell. According to reports and later investigations, Mitchell's actions suggested planning and patience. This was not a random event that happened suddenly. Instead, It appeared that he had been studying the situation and waiting for a moment when the opportunity seemed right. That realization would later make the entire situation even more disturbing. Danger had been present nearby for longer than anyone realized. When the moment finally came, it happened quietly. There were no loud alarms, no dramatic warnings, no signs that something terrible was about to unfold. During the night, Elizabeth's sleep was suddenly interrupted. A stranger had entered the home in an instant. The calm safety of her bedroom was replaced with confusion and fear. Moments that should have been peaceful were suddenly filled with uncertainty and shock. Within a very short period of time, Elizabeth was taken from the home where she had always felt protected. The night continued in silence, but everything had changed. When morning arrived, the family began to realize that something was terribly wrong. At first, it may have seemed like a simple misunderstanding. Perhaps Elizabeth had gone somewhere else in the house. Perhaps she had woken up earlier than usual. But as the minutes passed and the search continued from room to room, the reality became impossible to ignore. Elizabeth was gone. Panic quickly spread through the household. Every possible place was checked. Closets, hallways, nearby areas, anywhere she might have been. But there was no sign of her. The realization that a child has disappeared from their own home is one of the most frightening experiences a family can face. Questions begin racing through the mind almost instantly. Where could she be? What happened during the night? How could something like this occur without anyone noticing? The family quickly contacted authorities, and law enforcement began responding to the situation with urgency. Officers arrived at the home and began gathering information. They examined the scene carefully, searching for any detail that might provide a clue about what had happened. Soon, the search expanded beyond the house itself. Neighbors began to gather outside, trying to understand what had taken place. Word spread quickly through the community, and people began offering their help in any way they could. Search teams were organized. Volunteers walked through nearby areas, parks, and open spaces, hoping that some trace of Elizabeth might be found. But as the hours passed, the fear continued to grow. News of the disappearance soon reached local media outlets. Before long, the story was being reported across the country. The name Elizabeth Smart began appearing in television broadcasts, newspapers, and news reports. Her photograph was shared widely. Missing person posters began appearing in many places. People who had never met Elizabeth suddenly felt connected to the story and hoped for her safe return. Meanwhile, investigators began focusing their attention on potential suspects. One of the individuals who would later become central to the case was Brian David Mitchell. Reports suggested that Mitchell had displayed troubling and unusual behavior in the past. Some people who had encountered him previously described strange beliefs and unpredictable actions. These details gradually became part of the investigation as authorities tried to understand who might have been responsible for the abduction. Another person connected to the case was Wanda, Barzee. Investigators would later determine that she had assisted Mitchell during the time Elizabeth was being held captive. For law enforcement, the challenge of finding Elizabeth was enormous. Keeping someone hidden for a long period of time requires careful planning and constant movement. Experts who study criminal behavior often explain that cases like this involve manipulation, psychological pressure, and isolation. Victims can be placed in situations where escape becomes extremely difficult. In many cases, the person responsible for the crime relies not only on physical control, but also on fear, confusion, and isolation. These situations can make victims feel trapped even when they desperately want to find a way out. Experts who study cases like this often explain that manipulation and psychological pressure can be just as powerful as physical barriers. Yet even in circumstances that seem almost impossible, many survivors demonstrate incredible strength. Human resilience can appear in the most unexpected ways. When people are faced with frightening and uncertain situations, they sometimes discover an inner strength they never realized they had. According to later accounts, Elizabeth Smart showed remarkable awareness and resilience during her captivity. Despite the fear and uncertainty that surrounded her, she managed to remain aware of her surroundings and the people around her. Maintaining hope in such conditions is not easy. Days can feel long, and the uncertainty of what will happen next can be overwhelming. But hope, even a small amount of it, can become one of the most powerful forces for survival. For many victims in similar situations, hope becomes a quiet but constant companion. It is the belief that somehow, someday, things might change. It is the thought that rescue may still be possible. Even when the chances seem small. As weeks slowly turned into months, the investigation continued. Detectives and investigators refused to stop searching for answers. Every lead, every tip, and every small piece of information was examined carefully. Even details that seemed minor were considered important, because in cases like this, sometimes the smallest clue can lead to the biggest breakthrough. Meanwhile, the emotional pressure on Elizabeth's family continued to grow. Every day brought new questions and new worries. The uncertainty of not knowing where a loved one can be one of the most painful experiences a family can face. Public attention remained intense. People across the country continued to follow the story closely. News reports regularly updated viewers about the investigation. Many families who had never met Elizabeth felt connected to the case and hoped for her safe return. Communities shared her photograph, hoping someone might recognize her or provide information that could help investigators. Nearly 9 months after the abduction, something unexpected happened. In March of 2003. A group of observant citizens noticed something unusual while walking in a public area. It was an ordinary day, much like any other. People were going about their routines, moving through the streets and sidewalks without thinking that anything extraordinary might happen. But sometimes, important moments begin with very small observations. A man was traveling with 2 women. At first glance, the situation did not appear particularly alarming. People pass each other on the street every day without giving it much thought. But for the individuals who noticed this group, something about the situation felt unusual. There was something about the behavior of the people involved that did not seem quite right. One of the women appeared quiet and withdrawn. She avoided making eye contact with others around her. She was dressed in a way that concealed much of her appearance, making it difficult to see her face clearly. To some people, it might have seemed like a small and unimportant detail, but sometimes, small details matter. Authorities were contacted, and officers approached the group to ask a few questions. At first, the interaction appeared routine. Law enforcement officers often speak with individuals during investigations, simply to gather information and ensure everything is in order. But this situation quickly became something much more important. The moment was tense. For months, investigators had been searching for Elizabeth Smart. They had followed leads across different places and spoken with many people. Each time a potential clue appeared, there was a mixture of hope and caution. Now, suddenly, there was a possibility that the search might finally be reaching its conclusion. Officers carefully questioned the individuals they had approached. As the conversation continued, the situation slowly became clearer. After careful questioning and verification, the truth was revealed that the young woman standing before them was indeed Elizabeth Smart. After 9 long months of captivity, Elizabeth had finally been found. For the investigators who had worked tirelessly on the case, the moment brought a powerful sense of relief. Months of effort, countless hours of investigation, and the dedication of many people had finally led to this moment. The news spread quickly, Within a short period of time, reports began reaching Elizabeth's family. For months they had lived with uncertainty, fear, and emotional exhaustion. Each day had been filled with questions about what might have happened and whether Elizabeth might ever return home. At last, there was an answer. For her family, the relief was overwhelming. After months of searching and waiting, Elizabeth was alive. The long and painful period of uncertainty had finally come to an end. Elizabeth was coming home. The arrests of Brian David Mitchell and Wanda Barzee marked the conclusion of a long and complex investigation. Law enforcement officials began preparing the legal process that would follow, ensuring that those responsible for the crime would face justice. But Elizabeth's story did not end there. In the years that followed, she chose to transform her painful experience into something meaningful and positive. Many people who face traumatic events struggle with a lasting emotional impact, but Elizabeth decided to use her voice to help others. Rather than allowing the tragedy to define her life, she began speaking publicly about resilience, recovery, and the importance of supporting victims of crime. Over time, her story became a source of inspiration for many people. Through advocacy, education, and public speaking, Elizabeth began helping others understand the importance of awareness, prevention, and compassion for victims. Today, Elizabeth's story continues to be remembered not only as a frightening crime, but also as an example of courage and resilience. It reminds us that even the most peaceful communities can sometimes face unexpected dangers.